Hello guys, I hope everyone's doing okay. This is my third video in a row for the third consecutive day. Welcome to a new episode of Psicoactivo. This time around, I found a video that was very interesting, a podcast from Rizwan Virk, who is an entrepreneur, a video game developer, film producer, computer scientist, and author of several books, among them The Simulation Hypothesis and the Simulated Multiverse, which is one of the most enigmatic topics there are currently. And Berg talked about a lot of things with Rogan. He essentially revealed that he is talking to some of the scientists who are in these alleged reverse engineering programs of the UFO topic. But what I was most interested in was him talking about this simulation hypothesis and how he came about with the idea, because he's a video game developer. So it's only natural that he would start thinking about this and studying all different types of studies that have been done on it, quantum mechanics, quantum physics, the whole shebang. And basically, he does talk about this difference between the NPCs and the main players within the hypothesis. And he wanted to think about how we can create a place like the Matrix. And for those of you who know me, okay, first I'm going to show you a clip of Virk talking about this. Here's Virk.
I was a video game developer in Silicon Valley, and then I became an investor in the video game industry. My background's in computer science. And what happened was, after I sold my last video game company back in 2016, so we're talking 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now, and I put on a virtual reality headset and started playing a VR ping pong game. Right, now, these headsets were even bigger than they are now, and they were wired, so there's no mistaking you're in virtual reality. But what happened was that the ping pong game was so realistic that for a moment my brain forgot that this wasn't a real game of table tennis. So much so that I tried to put the paddle down on the table and I tried to lean against the table. But of course there was no table. So the controller fell to the floor and I almost fell over. I had to do one of these double takes like, oh, wait, I'm just in VR. Right? So I started to think about how long would it take us to build something like the Matrix, something that's so immersive that you would forget, right, that you were inside a video game. And so that led me to this idea of the simulation point, which is a kind of technological singularity. But then I started to research things like quantum physics and some of the mysteries around, the observer effect and quantum mechanics. And then I started to look at all the world's religions, and I realized that they're all kind of saying the same thing, which is that there is no physical universe. And so, that led me to the conclusion that we are most likely inside some kind of a computer simulation or a massively multiplayer video game, depending on how you look at it.
But where did that simulation come from if we are inside of it?
Well, that's the big question, right? And there's two versions of simulation theory. And, I teach a class on this at Arizona State University. It's probably the first college-level class about simulation theory, and it kind of pulls in science fiction, religion, philosophy, and technology. But one of the key distinctions I tell my students to make, because it's not talked about a lot with simulation theory, is what I call the NPC versus the RPG versions of simulation theory.
Okay.
Right. So NPC, as you probably know, means non-player characters within video games. So those are the AIs in the video game. The bartenders, the people you're beating up, the opponents, all of that stuff. But basically, they're just code and they're AI. Then there's the RPG version, which is that we are actually doing a role-playing game. Right. So you exist outside the game, and then you have a character or avatar inside the game. So it's just like what we would consider an MMORPG today, right? Except with more sophisticated technology. And so in that case, you get a little bit of a different answer than if you talk about an NPC-only type of simulation, right? Because that's just running on a computer, and we're all AI in that case. Now, the two aren't mutually exclusive, right? In a video game like Fortnite or whatever, World of Warcraft, you have NPCs and you have PCs or player characters, right? So you've got both of those things going on. And so depending on how you look at it, you might come to different, different answers about who's outside the simulation, which would answer the question of who made the simulation.
Okay, so based on what he said right there, those of you who know me, I've been studying and investigating a case of Dr. Jacobo Grinberg, who is a Mexican scientist who founded the Mexican Institute of Consciousness back in the late 80s. And his whole area of study is based on the Mexican shamans of Mexico. And through decades, he came up with the Syntergic theory, which is better explained by him. There's a long video that thanks to my friend Gonzalo Chavez, shout out to Gonzalo, he helped me translate it and dub it to English. This is one of the most, because AI right now is not doing so well in terms of how these dubs are translating. So we did the best that we could. I think it's fairly easy to understand it, but I am going to play this video that is roughly 7 to 8 minutes long that explains how he connects the shaman tradition and how they manage to understand the confines of reality, and how essentially they are the ones who create reality. He talks about this famous shaman Pachita, who essentially did these unbelievable surgeries and transplants and all that stuff by using this Syntergic theory that the doctor eventually came up with. Those of you who know about this case know that in 1994, Dr. Greenberg disappeared, just as he was about to prove an experiment called the transferred potential. I talk about this at length with Dr. Alex Gomez Marin, Dr. Amit Goswami, and with Nick Cook, the author of The Hunt for Zero Point. And I find it really interesting that among the English speakers who are into the topic, they don't know the doctor. And I'm looking to change that. So this is the first video of this kind that I'm going to do. And I'm going to play you this clip from Dr. Greenberg, who was on a show that was very famous in Spain called Midnight Sun, or El Sol de Medianoche, where there's like a town hall of experts and scientists. There's shamans and there's parapsychologists, and they were all giddy to talk to him because he was proposing this theory, and they were all excited about it because in Spain he made like a massive impact with his work. So here it is.
Several clarifications before starting. You said the shamanic conception of existence. And yes, I want to clarify a little what this shamanic thing is, or what shamans are. They are the indigenous wise men of many places in the world. We have studied these wise men in Mexico. One of the lineages of these people is found in the state of Sonora, the Yaquis of Sonora, and they have Carlos Castaneda, oh yes. And they have a conception about how perception is created. They are fundamentally interested in explaining, or trying to explain, how images appear, how sounds appear, how different levels of reality appear. So, in this sense, the Syntergic theory is related to this shamanic conception, but does not arise from it. It is related because this theory is also a theoretical attempt to try to explain how perception is created, but the nomenclature it uses is different from that used by shamans, although the conclusions are very similar. The Syntergic theory states that there is a basic organization of space. This basic organization would be like a matrix, a lattice, whose fundamental state is total coherence and symmetry. Contemporary physics also agrees on this. Any modification in this fundamental matrix of space is detected by a physical instrument as an elementary particle. Then the instrument detects that there is something appearing against a stable background of all total coherence. And physicists and people who know what the measurement of the instrument means talk about the appearance of an elementary particle. The idea is that lattice distortions, especially complex distortions, are what we can call objects. The Syntergic theory states that the human brain is capable of distorting the structure of the lattice in the most complex way known in the universe. And this complex distortion of the lattice constitutes perceptual reality, in such a way that each of the neuronal activities constitutes a micro-distortion of the lattice. And since the human brain contains around 10,000 and 12,000 million neuronal elements, each micro-distortion, each alteration of this basic structure of space interacts with each other, forming a complex macro-distortion that the theory calls the neuronal field. Thus, the fundamental hypothesis of the Syntergic theory is that perception arises as a result of the interaction of the neuronal field with the lattice of space. There are different levels of interaction between the neural field and the lattice, and each of these levels constitutes or is associated with or is perceived as a different level of consciousness. For example, there is auditory consciousness, visual consciousness. They are different types of consciousness, and the theory states that each of them is related to the parameters of this interaction between the neuronal field and lattice. Well, first, I don't understand why someone takes the attribute of judging the understanding of others. I mean, it's very strange. Second, in any creation of a theory, for the creator of the theory, the experience of creation is an extraordinarily interesting event. When the theory is created and given as a final result, the listener of the theory can consider it as a product of an intellectualization foreign to experience. But every creation of a theory, when this theory is deep, comes from experience. For example, I mentioned these indigenous wise men who are interested in explaining perception. They have a theory of perception, but this theory of perception arises from their experience. They perceive the world in a certain way that is different from the perception that other types of people have because they were born in another culture, simply because of this. And then from this perception they create a conception. The interesting thing about the conception in every specific attempt to try to understand perception is that in some way, the attempt to understand perception puts us at the foundation of any reality. In our time, one of the great dangers, one of the great pains that we are experiencing is the loss of meaning and dispersion. In other words, we often encounter people who really don't have much of an idea of who they are, nor do they have anything that helps them understand themselves and reach their center, a unification of themselves. So the attempt, for example, to explain perception is an attempt to achieve this unification, because we will be at the basis of the creation of any reality. And understanding how reality is created helps us unify. So it is not intellectualism, especially in the process of creation, because fine theory, deep theory, always arises from experience. I would like to give 2 pieces of advice, but first something very interesting. Salvador and I witnessed an extraordinary event, and come on. I am a scientist. I have a laboratory. I study brain activity, brain physiology, and they invited me to meet this Pachita woman and her operations. And what I saw there, in principle, contradicted every concept and every knowledge that I had about reality. And what that I saw taught me, that Salvador was describing it, and that I was also a witness of that. What it taught me is that I cannot say what the limit of human capacity is from that experience. I do not dare to say that the human being cannot do this. The brain has such a limit to its potential. But it would seem that we are within a very extensive continuum, and we do not know what the extremes of this continuum are.
So, interesting, right? What I propose here is that this simulation theory is incomplete in many ways. And I believe that the missing link is this Syntergic theory. And there's a reason why the doctor disappeared when he was about to prove this transferred potential experiment. There's a paper he wrote alongside Dr. Goswami where he managed to prove more than 70% of times that essentially quantum entanglement is real. But he did it in the 90s, because in 2022, a Nobel Prize was given to 3 different scientists that prove in particles that quantum entanglement is real. That famous quote from Einstein called spooky action at a distance. You've heard of this many times, I'm sure. And Dr. Greenberg did it between people, between human minds. What essentially he did was he put 2 people together in a room, made them interact, and create a sort of bond, like a telepathic bond. And then he separated them. And he did this experiment where he stimulated one person and connected the other person with these wires in the brain. And when he stimulated this person, a reaction was captured in the other person. And that's amazing. So it proves that once we interact with each other, just as particles do, in the quantum entanglement experiment, and you separate them, they remain connected, which means that between human minds, this is possible. And when he was about to go to India and prove this experiment between Mexico and India, that's exactly when he disappeared. And I eventually found some proof that he had some connections with some of the most famous ufologists in history, such as Dr. Jacques Vallée and author John Keel, who famously wrote the Operation Trojan Horse book, which is one of the most famous books in ufology. And I am still ongoing with this investigation, trying to find out what the doctor was doing with them. There were 2 separate occasions, which I already confirmed. He was with them, but I still need to understand what the nature of their gathering was, because there's a picture that I'm gonna put right here of Andrea Pujarich, who was also part of the famous MK Ultra program. Dr. Hal Puthoff was part of this program as well. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they were together. So I still haven't found out what the connection between this doctor and his study of consciousness and the Syntergic theory has with the ufology, essentially. I suspect that it has to do with how UFOs, as Bob Lazar once said, that UFOs are controlled through consciousness. So there is a connection there. And it's a really fascinating case. I'm going to put links in the description of a documentary that came out in 2021 from director Ida Cuellar, who I am going to have in a show next week. One of the few interviews he's ever done. I'm going to have him on the show I'm gonna try to do subtitles because he doesn't speak English, so we're gonna do the interview in Spanish, and I'm gonna do subtitles. This documentary is key, but the investigation is still ongoing because it's a cold case. Nobody knows where the doctor went, but there are many clues to where he might have gone, and there are ties to the CIA. There are ties to these famous ufologists. So this case is very very interesting. And what I find the most interesting is that I believe that this simulation theory, in part, is true, but also we this doctor stipulates in his theory, Syntergic theory, that we are the ones who create this reality. He says that our brains have the capacity to create this reality, and we do it automatically already, but we just don't know that we're doing it because we're not aware that we have this capacity. And what he was attempting to do was make us all aware that we're capable of this creation through our minds. Fascinating, right? And the older civilizations, shamans, and other mystics throughout history, they did understand this. But there was a time in which many of them were silenced and killed and persecuted, and because partly because of religious dogma, partly because of the industrial revolution that made us very technologed over the years. We have been disconnecting from our own abilities because essentially our brains and our nervous system is essentially like a quantum computer. That's what Dr. Donald Hoffman stipulates in his theories, and this is what Dr. Greenberg says on his Syntergic theory. So I find it really fascinating, and all his work, like 50 books he wrote throughout history, throughout his career, he essentially all his books are a guide that helps us awaken this part of our brains and our being that can help us manipulate reality around us. And this is not like the X-Men, okay? It's not like it can essentially eventually get to become magic in a sense, what we perceive as magic, but I think it's more organic than that, you know? There's already people in the world that already have control of their whole reality and the people around them. But it's a process. It doesn't happen just like that. You need to meditate, you need to read, you need to uh, learn how to understand the basic reality that you live in, and learn to understand that your eyes and your physical capabilities are very limited right now, but there are ways to hone these skills and hone these capabilities in order to make you more able to understand and manipulate reality around you. And that's the reason I created this podcast. I want to find out how to do that as I keep investigating, and hopefully through these videos and through my information I can help people understand as well, and help them control and create the reality around them. So yeah, simulation theory, it has some points to it that I agree with, but the Syntergic theory is complementary to it. There's this element that the human mind has this power, and Rizwan Virk does not talk about this. He believes there's like an external force that created this whole reality, and although it may be true, there's also this as if it was a video game. We also have these skills that are unlockable. So let's unlock them. Until next time.